Hey y'all, it's your friendly neighborhood therapist, and it is February 10th, 2025. So it is day 10 in our series of lesser known facts and lesser known people of the culture for Black History Month. Now, yes, we don't need to do a shirt check. Same shirt because I just did the ninth. Yeah, y'all know. Y'all already know. Anyway, today I want to talk about another Black woman simply because I'm wearing a Black woman on my shirt. So, I know it's a ton of people on the shirt, but it's in the hair of a Black woman. Now, that being said, I want to teach y'all a little bit about another Black woman who broke a glass ceiling and was the first of her kind to do a thing. So let's get into it. All right, y'all. So this is Miss Lena Richard, born September 9th, 1892 or 1893. Y'all know they didn't always have accurate records of folks' birthdays. But on any note, she was a chef, cookbook author, restaurateur, frozen food entrepreneur, and television host from New Orleans, Louisiana. Still tying in with yesterday, being that the Super Bowl was held in New Orleans. New Orleans has a whole lot of history and culture when it comes to Black folks. But to continue. In 1949, Richard became the first Black woman to host her own television cooking show. So before your Martha Stewarts and before all of these other people, Paula Dean and all of that, it was Miss Lena Richard. All right? For Julia Childs, all of that. It was Miss Lena Richard. Her show aired from October 1949 to November 1950 on local television station WDSU. Richard initially received her culinary education locally in New Orleans and later in Boston, where she attended the school founded by Fanny Farmer. She graduated in 1918 and returned to New Orleans, where a few years later she opened her own catering business and several restaurants. She opened a cooking school in 1937 in New Orleans, specifically for Black students. In 1939, Richard self published Lena Richard's Cookbook. The cookbook made her the first Black woman author to feature New Orleans Creole cuisine. Just a little bit about her early life. Lena Richard, born Lena Paul, was born in New Roads, Louisiana on September 9th, 1892 or 93, to Francois Laurent and Jean Pierre Paul. She was baptized as Marie Ariana Paul in the Catholic Church on October 9th, 1892, and was one of six children. At an early age, Richard moved to New Orleans, where her mother and aunt worked as domestic servants for Alice and Nugent Varian at their home on Esplanade Avenue. Richard helped her mother and aunt in the kitchen after school, and upon her graduation, the Varians hired her and later sent her to cooking school in New Orleans and at the Fanny Farmer Cooking School in Boston. Richard graduated from the Fanny Farmer School in 1918 and returned to New Orleans. Now on to her culinary career. She began her culinary training working as a domestic worker employed by the Varian family of New Orleans. Alice and Nugent Varian would later send Richard to the Fanny Farmer Cooking School in Boston. When she returned after graduation, she started a catering business. During the next 2 decades, she started multiple businesses and also worked as a cook at the Orleans Club, an elite organization for white women. In 1937, Richard and her daughter Marie started a cooking school. As historian Ashley Rose Young writes, Richard's school targeted young Black men and women. She sought to train them in the culinary sciences so as to give them a chance to make a career for themselves in a city that historically disenfranchised African Americans. In 1939, Richard self published Lena Richard's Cookbook. A year later, Houghton Mifflin reissued her book with a new title, New Orleans Cookbook. Richard traveled to promote her book in New York City, where she sold 700 copies during a 1 month trip. She was also featured in both the New York Times and the Times Herald Tribune. Richard was recruited to be the head chef at Bird and Bottle Inn in Garrison, New York, where she worked for 18 months starting in 1940. Richard soon returned to New Orleans and opened Lena's Eatery in November of 1941. She was recruited by Colonel Williamsburg to be the chef at the Travis House, where she cooked for dignitaries and military leaders from 1943 until 1945. In 1946, Richard started a frozen food business, creating fully cooked packaged dinners that were flown across the United States. The meals were prepared by Borderline Fine Foods Company of Metairie. I used to live in Metairie, y'all. I attended Xavier University in New Orleans, and I used to live in Metairie. In 1949, Richard opened her last restaurant, the Gumbo House. It employed most of Richard's family and remained open after her death. Now on to her media career. From 1949 to 1950, Richard hosted a 30-minute cooking television show called Lena Richard's New Orleans Cookbook. The show aired twice weekly and was broadcast on New Orleans' first television station, WDSU. During the program, Richard and her assistant, Marie Matthews, guided their television audience through recipes from Richard's cookbook. Richard and Matthews were the first African Americans to host a cooking show in an age when few households even owned television sets. In her personal life, Richard married Percival Richard on July 29, 1914. They had one daughter, Marie Richard, who graduated from Xavier University with a degree in home economics. Marie helped her mother open her cooking school in New Orleans in 1937. In 2020, Richard was one of 8 women featured in the Only One in the Room display at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. Miss Lena Richard was amazing in that she laid the groundwork for Black women who are triple threats in food, service, authors, and visual media. She passed away November 27th, 1950. So there you have Miss Lena Richard. One of one, honey. The first of many. She broke a lot of glass ceilings and barriers by being the first Black woman to have a television show in New Orleans, specifically a cooking show. We hear so much about other culinary geniuses, but yet I didn't know about her. I'm pretty sure people in New Orleans may have known about her, but so many other people likely did not. So you can still get her book. So if you want to cook up some Creole cuisine from a Black woman who broke barriers and glass ceilings, go on and get the Lena Richard cookbook. All right, y'all. Have a beautiful, wonderful rest of your day, and I will holler at y'all later.